Hey, hey. Edit this out right here. Hmm, Sorry about that. There we go. Hmm. Don't know what's that. I don't know what's happening though. No, it's fine all day, and now that I'm gonna narrate, this crap starts happening. Wash it down with some water. Hopefully, it goes away. And let's start recording right now. Yep, so. Excuse me. And we're about to do the intro in this story intro in a little bit. That way we get in the zone. This one is gonna be long. It's at least one, two, three, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12 pages. Oh boy. 12 pages of answers. And I'm gonna need to put a disclaimer as well. Hey there, Outlaw. Welcome back. And I see that you want to get the answer to my theory regarding the previous story of day. just get the answer on this story coming up. Because this is a story I mentioned far below. And just as a heads up, though, this story, I'm gonna read it as is. That means that the language in it might not be the best thing for all viewers. That's the language of the narrator, and I don't want to mess with that at all. So, with that being said, if you're comfortable with that, go ahead and grab a drink, popcorn, whatever you need, and I'll be narrating this story for you. Far Below, written by Robert Barber Johnson, narrated by Gamma Akutabi. With a roar and a howl, the thing was upon us, out of total black. Oh, I already messed up right there. With a roar and with a roar and give it a couple seconds. With a roar and a howl, the thing was upon us, out of total darkness, involuntary. Ooh, it's gonna be one of those nights. With a roar and a howl, the thing was upon us, out of total darkness. Involuntarily, I drew back as its headlights passed, and every object in the little room rattled from the reverberations. Then the power car was by, and there was only the clackety, and there was only the clack, and there was only the clackety clack of wheels and light windows flickering, of wheels wheels and lighted windows flickering past like bits of film on a badly connected projection machine. I caught glimpses of occupants briefly. Bleak-eyed men sitting miserably on hard benches. Bleak-eyed men sitting miserably on hard benches. A pair of lovers, obviously, to the tours. Oh. Bleak-eyed men sitting miserably on hard benches. Pair of lovers, obviously to the hour's lateness and all else. An old, an old bearded Jew in a black cap, sound asleep. Two Harlem Negroes grinning, conductor here and there, too. Their uniforms black splashes against the blaze of car lights. Then, red tail lamps shot by, and the roar died to an earthquake rumble far down the track. 3-1 Express, my friend said quietly from the battery. On time to the minute, too. It's the last, until nearly dawn. He spoke briefly into a telephone, saying words I could not catch, for the racket of the train was still in my ears. I occupied I occupied the interval by staring about me. There was so much to be seen in the little room, such a strange diversity of apparatus, switches and coils and curious mechanisms, charts and graphs and piles of documents, and, dominating all, the great blackboard on which a luminous worm seemed to crawl, inching along past the dotted lines labeled foreign, inching along, inching along past the dotted lines labeled foreign, inching along past the dotted lines labeled 49th Street, 52nd Street, 58th Street, and 60th. A new wrinkle. A new wrinkle, that? My friend said. He had to put down his phone and was watching the board with me. He had to put down his bowl. He had to put he had to put down his phone and was watching the board with me. Lord, I don't think Lord, I don't dare think what it costs to install. It's not just a charge, you know. It actually records invisible lights, the sort of things that open speakeasy doors in rich men's garages. Pairs of them space approximately every 25 yards along 5 miles of the subway tunnel. Figure that out on paper, and the total you get will seem hardly believable. And yet, the city passed the appropriation for them without a murmur. It was one of the last things Major Walker put up before his resignation. Gentlemen, he said to the finance board, it doesn't matter what you think about me, but this measure must go through. And it did. There wasn't a murmur or And it did. There wasn't a murmur of protest. And it did. There wasn't a murmur of protest, though the city was almost broke at the time. What's the matter, man? You're looking queer. I'm feeling queer, I said. Do you mean to say the thing goes that far back? To Walker's time? He laughed. It was a strange laugh that died eerily amid the dying echoes of the train far down the tunnel. Good Lord, he gasped. To his time, man, Walker hadn't served his first term as mayor when this thing started. It goes back to World War days, and even before that. The wreck of the train, I recall, passed as a German spy plot to keep us from going on with the Allies. The newspaper howled bloody murder about alleged confessions and evidence they claimed they had. We let him howl. We let him howl. Of course. Why not? America was as good as it. America was as good as in the war anyhow by then. And if we told the people of New York City what really wrecked the subway train, well, the horrors of Chateau Thierry and Verdun and all the rest of them put together wouldn't have equaled the shambles that rioting mobs would have made of this place. People just couldn't stand the thought of it, you know? They go mad if they knew what was down here, far below. The silence was worse than the roar had been, I thought. The strange echoing, somehow pregnant silence of empty vastness. Only the drip drip of water from subterranean leak broke it. That, and the faint crackling noise the indicator made as its phosphor that and the faint crackling noise that the indicator made as its phosphorescent crawling hinted at 68th Street, 72nd, 78. Yes, my friend said slowly. They go mad if they knew. And sometimes I wonder why we don't go mad down here. We do know and have to face the horrors down here. Night after night and year after year. I think it's only because we don't really face it what we get by. You know, because we never quite define the thing in our minds because we never quite define the thing in our minds uh, because we never quite define the thing in our minds objectively. We just sort of let things hang in the air, you might say. We don't speak of what we're guarding against by name. We just call it them or one of them, you know? Take them for granted, just as we took the enemy overseas as something that's just down here and has to be fought. I think if we really did let our minds get to brooding on what they are, it'd all be over for us. Human flesh and blood couldn't stand it, you know, couldn't stand it, he brooded, staring out into the tunnel's darkness. The indicator cracked faintly on the wall. 92nd Street, 98, 101st. Beyond 120th Street, things are pretty safe. I heard my friend's voice as I watched. When the train reaches that point, you'll see a green light flash all clear. Though, that doesn't mean absolutely safe. You understand? It's just what we've It's just what we've established as the furthest reach of their activities. They may extend them at any time, although so far they haven't done so. There seems to be something circumscribed about their minds, you know? They're creatures of habit. That must be what it is that kept them in this one little stretch of tunnel with all the vast interlocking networks of New York's subway system to rove in on. Ooh. With all the vast interlocking New York, with all the vast interlocking network of New York's subway system to rove in if they chose. I can't think of any other explanation unless you want to get into the supernatural and say it's because they are bound to this particular locality by some sort of mystic laws, perhaps because it's lower than the other tunnels, chiseled far down into the basic bedrock of Manhattan, and so near to the East River, and so near to the East River. Oh, and so near to the East River, you can almost hear the water lapping on quiet nights. Or maybe it's just the awful dankness of the tunnel here. The fungi mosh the fungi moisture and miasmic darkness that suit them. At all events, they don't come up anywhere else except along this stretch. And we've got the lights, and the patrol cars, and the three-way stations like this one, with 10 men on constant duty from dark till dawn. Oh yes, my boy. It's quite a little army I command down here in the night of It's quite a little army I command down here in the night washes. An army of the unburied dead, you might say. Or an army of the eternally damned. Ooh, let me check things over here. Alright, things are still working. That's what matters. I've actually had one of my men go. I actually had one of my men go mad, you know? Two others had to be placed in sanitariums for a while, but they got over it and are serving here still. But this fellow, well, we had to machine gun him down like a dog finally, or he'd have got, or he'd have got one, or he'd have got one of us. That was before we got the dark lights place. You see, and he was able to hide out on You see, and he was able to hide out in the tunnels for days without our being able to find him. We'd hear him howl sometimes as we patrol, and see him eyes shining just as their and see his eyes shining just as their eyes do in the darkness. So we knew that he was quite gone. So when we finally ran him down, we killed him. Just like that. No bones made about it. Put, put, put. And that was the end. We buried him down in the tunnel too. And now the trains run. And now the trains run. And now the trains run over him as he lies. Oh, there was nothing irregular about the business. We fulfilled out. Oh, there was nothing irregular about the business. We filled out full department reports and got the consent of his relatives and so on. Only we just couldn't take the poor fellow above ground and run risks about. Ooh. Only we just couldn't take the poor fellow above ground and run risks of people seeing him before interment. Interment? Yeah, it's interment. Only we couldn't just take the poor fellow above ground and run risks of people seeing him before interment. You see, there were certain alterations. I don't want to dwell on it, but his face, well, the change was just beginning, of course, but it was quite unmistakable, quite dehumanizing. You know, there would have been some sort of excitement up there, I'm afraid, just as the sight of that face. And there were other details, things I only found out when I dissected his body. But I think rather not go into them either. Oh boy, if you don't mind. The whole point is, we have to be rather careful down here. All of us in the special detail. That's why we have such unusual working conditions. We wear police uniforms, of course, but we aren't subject to ordinary police discipline. But we aren't subject to ordinary police discipline. Lord, what would I, Lord, what would an, Lord, what would an above ground cop make of having every other night off and every day all to himself and with a salary at that? Well, a cop, a corporal down here gets as much as he does an inspector up there. But at that, I think we earn our pay. I know I do. Of course, I can tell you what my salary is. They made me promise never to disclose it when they hired me from the Natural History Museum back in. Well, I don't like to think about how long ago that was. I was Professor Gordon Craig in those days. You know, instead of Inspector Craig of NYPD. And I just returned from Carl Akerley. Carl Akerley. Carl Akerley. Yeah. And I just returned from Carl Akerley's first African expedition after gorillas. That was why they brought the thing to me for examination, you see. After the first big wreck in the subway, that only been open less than a year, they found it pinned down in the wreckage, screaming in agony from their lights on its dead white eye. Screaming in agony from their lights on its dead white eyeballs. Instead, I mean, not instead. Screaming in agony from its screaming in agony from their screaming in agony from their lights on its dead white eyeballs. Indeed, it seemed to have died from the lights as much as from anything else. Organically, it was sound enough, save for a broken bone or two. Well, they brought it to me because I was supposed to be the museum's leading authority on apes, and I examined it. Believe me, and I examined it. Believe me, I examined it, old boy. I went for 6 days and nights without sleep or even rest, analyzing that dead corpse down to its last rag and bone and hank of hair. No scientist on this earth, no scientist on this earth ever had a chance like that before, and I was making the best of it. I found out all there was. I found out all there was. I found out all there was to be found before I collapsed over my laboratory. I found out all there was to be found before I collapsed over my laboratory table and had to be taken to the hospital. Of course, long before I, of course, long before that, I had told them the thing wasn't an ape. There was vaguely anthropoid structure, all right, and the blood corpuscles were almost human, quite shockingly so. But the head and the spade like appendages and the muscular development were quite unlike any beast or man on this earth. Indeed, the thing had never been on this earth. There was no doubt of that. It would have died above ground in half a minute, just like an angleworm in the sun. And I'm afraid my report to the authorities didn't help them much. After all, even a fellow scientist would have found it a bit difficult to reconcile my classification of some sort of giant carrion feeding subterranean mole with my ravings about canine canine and simian development of members and my absurd insistence on startlingly humanoid cranial development and brain convolutions indicating a degree of intelligence that, well, there's no use going into all that now. I firmly expected them to order me up before. I firmly expected them to order me up before sending. I firmly expected them to order me up before a sanity commission. I firmly expected them to order me up before a sanity commission when I reported my findings. Instead, they offered me a position as head of Instead, they offered me a position as a head of special subway detail at a salary that was, to say the least, fantastic. It was more a month that I've been getting a year from the museum. Because you see, they deduce much of the stuff for themselves without needing me to tell them. They have facts they deliberately. Okay, let me see if there's any replies or comments from the other places. No, all quiet. Oh no, got two washers. I got a quiet one. A quiet one. That's okay. Appreciate you one. Appreciate you washing quiet one. But just as a reminder, this is a classic. This is a classic story, and I don't want to change any of the wording on it. The wording on the story and what is said are not really my views. It's just how the story was written. And I like classics to stay the same way as they are. Classic. without any modernizing at all, if possible. Okay, I'm gonna have to go back on the. Let me drink a bit of water. That boys can. That boys can take a. Uh, can't take its toll on you. I know cold water is not good, but over here where I'm at is really unbearably hot. And lukewarm water won't do the trick at all. Oh, great. Um, that annoying cough went away. Hooray! Mm, mm. Note to self: I'm gonna give me a chair, like something close to a barber chair, or or something like that, so that way my chair doesn't make that much squeaky noise when I move around. This pleather thing does make a lot of noise, and although it says it's comfortable, it's not really that comfortable all the time. Alrighty, back to the story. Because you see, they did this. Because you see, they deduce much of the stuff for themselves without needing me to tell them. They have facts they deliberately withheld from me, not wanting to influence my report. They knew that that train had been deliberately derailed. The mutilated track proved that beyond all doubt. No less than no less than 3 ties had been taken up and laid some distance away down the tunnel. And the condition of the earth above the wreckage cars show conclusively that extensive mining and sapping had taken place there. It was like a gigantic molehill, only worse. And while I had been analyzing stomach fluids and body tissue to try to find out what my subject fed upon, they'd been burying, secretly and with most elaborate precautions, the half-dissected corpses of half a dozen men and women and children who, well, they hadn't died in the wreck. Oh boy. Who, well, they hadn't died in the wreck. Oh boy. They hadn't died in the wreck any more than had that screaming thing that hid its eyes from the lights when they found it pinning the wreckage where it had been caught while trying to drag a dead victim out. God, what a hideous shambles that place must have been before the wrecking crew got hit. What a hideous shamble that place must have been before the wrecking crew got there. Mercifully, of course, there was total darkness. Poor devils who were merely injured never knew what charnel horrors were going on in the Stygian depths above. About them? Yeah, it wasn't a typo. The poor devils who were merely injured never knew what charnel horrors were going on in the Stygian depths about them, nor care, no doubt, in their agony. Few of them gibber afterwards about green eyes and claws that raked their faces, but, of course, all that was set down to delirium. Even one man who had his arm shoe half off Even one man who had his arm shoe half off never knew. Surgeons amputated the rest immediately and told him when he regained consciousness that he lost it in the wreck. He's still walking the streets today, blissfully ignorant of what almost happened to him that night. Oh, you'd be surprised, old boy, how you can hush a thing up if you got a whole city administration behind you. And believe me, we did hush matters up. No newspaper reporter was ever allowed to see the wreck. Freedom of the press or no freedom of the press. The government wanted to appoint a commission to investigate. We squelched it. And by the time the crews had cleaned out the smashed train and removed the last victim, the special subway detail had gone into action. And it's been on steady duty ever since, for the last 20-odd years. We had a terrible time at first, of course. All these modern improvements weren't available then. All we had were lanterns and guns and handcars with which to patrol nearly 5 miles of tunnel. It was Mrs. Partington sweeping back the sea all over again, only worse. A handful of puny mortals against hell itself, in the eternal darkness of this long, gloomy tunnel far below the city. Ooh. Hmm. Oh, get a stretch. We've been live for 38 minutes. 38 minutes of narrating. Woohoo. I'm gonna see how my voice is tomorrow. There were no more wrecks after we took over, though. I'll say that much. Oh, an accident or two. How could we prevent them? We did everything we could think of. How we worked in those early days. Once we sank a shaft 50 feet deep in the earth, where we'd seen queer disturbances besides the train tracks and heard queerer sounds. And once we blocked up both ends of the tunnel for a mile stretch and filled it with poison gas. And once we dynamited, but why go on? It was all useless, utterly useless. We just couldn't get to grips with anything tangible. Oh, we'd heard sounds sometimes on our long dismal patrols in the darkness. Our little lanterns were mere pink pinpricks. Our little lanterns mere pinpricks of light in these vast old concrete vaults. We, we catch glimpses of glinting eyes far off, find fresh earth piled up where only a moment before there been hard-packed cinders and gravel. Once in a while we fire our guns at something whitish and half-seen, but there be only a tittering laugh in answer, a laugh as mirthless and savage as that of a hyena, dying away in the earth. A dozen times I was tempted to chuck the whole thing, get back above ground to sunshine and sanity, and forget the charnel horrors of this man near the totem world far underneath. And then I get to thinking of all those helpless men and women and children riding the train, unsuspecting through the haunted dark, with evil out of the primeval dawn burrowing beneath them for their destruction. And, well, I just couldn't go, that's all. I stayed and I did my duty, as the rest did, year after year. It's been a strange career for a man of science, and certainly one I'd never dreamed I'd be following during all the years I prepared myself for museum work. And yet I flatter myself that it's been rather a social useful career at that. Perhaps more so than stuffing animals for dusty museum cases, or writing monstrous textbooks that no one ever bothers to read. For I've a science of my own down here, you know, the science of keeping millions of dollars worth of subway tunnels swept clean of horrors, and of safeguarding the lives of half the population of the world's largest city. And then, too, I've opportunities for research here which most of my colleagues above ground will give their right arm for. The opportunity to study an absolute unknown form of life. A grotesquerie so monstrous that even after all these years of contact with it, I sometimes doubt my own senses even now. Although the horror is authentic enough, if you come right down to it. It's been attested in every country in the world and by every people. Why, even the Bible has references to the ghouls that burrow in the earth. And even today in modern Persia, they hunt down with dogs and guns, like beasts, strange tomb-dwelling creatures, neither quite human nor quite beasts. And in Syria and Palestine and parts of Russia. Hello, viewers. This story's gonna continue in a bit. Just taking a little breather. And we're gonna continue. But as for this particular place, well, but as for this particular place, well, you'd be surprised how many records we found, how many actual evidence of the things we've uncovered from Manhattan Island earliest history, even before the white men settled here. As the curator of the Aborigines Museum out on the Riverside Drive about the burial custom of island Indians 1,000 years ago, custom perfectly inexplicable, unless you take into consideration what they were guarding against, and ask him to show you that skull. half human and half canine, that came out of an Indian mound as far away as Albany, and those ceremonial robes of Aboriginal shamans plainly traced with drawings of whitish spidery things burrowing through conventionalized tunnels, and doing other things too, that show the Indian artist must have known them and their habits. Oh, yes, it's all down there in black and white. Once, once we have the sense to read it. And even after white men came, what about the eerily? And even after white men came, what about the early writings of the old Dutch settlers? What about Jan van? Oh, that's quite a name. What about Jan van der Ries and Walter van Twiller? Even some of Washington Irving's writings have a nasty twist to them. If you come to once, if you once realize it, and if you once realize it, and there's some mighty queer passages in the history of ooh, and there's some mighty queer passages in the history of the city of New York, mention of guard patrols kept for no rational purpose in early streets at night, particularly in the region of cemeteries, of forests and excursions in the lightless dark, and flintlocks popping and graves hastily dug and filled in before dawn woke the city to life. And then the modern writers, lore. There was a whole library of them on the subject. One of them, a great student of the subject, had almost as much data on them from his readings as I gleaned from my years of study down here. Oh, yes, I learned a lot from Lovecraft, and he got a lot from me too. That's where what you might call the authenticity came from in some of his yarns that attracted the most attention. Oh, of course, he had to soft pedal the strongest parts of it, just as you're going to have to do if you ever mention this in your own writings. But if you ever, but even with the worst plays, but even with the worst play down, there's still enough horror and nightmare in it to. Oh, that's quite a sentence there. But even with the worst played, but even with the worst play down, there's still enough horror and nightmares in to blast a man's soul if he lets himself think on what goes on down here, below the blessed sanity of Earth's mercifully concealing crust, far below. The One Piece is real. Of all things he could have wrote, you said the One Piece is real. Lim is real. Lim is real. Lim is Bay. Oh, back to the story. We figure out we who've been studying them all this time that they must have been pretty numerous ones. No wonder the Indians sold this place so cheaply. Oh, that's no, that cheaply sounded messed up. I'm gonna have to retake. No wonder they sold this place so cheaply. You sell your home cheaply too if it were fairly overrun with monstrous noxious vermin that, but with civilizations coming, they were decimated, killed off, pogrom against, blasted with fire and steel by men whose utter ruthlessness sprang from soul-shuddering detestation, who slew and kept silent about their slaying, lest their fellow men think them mad, until finally the blasted remnant of the things went far on the ground, burrowed down like worms to charnel depths that, well, we daren't conjecture. Well, we daren't conjecture just where, but we think that there's some fault in the basic bedrock of the island, some monstrous cavern whose edge this lowest of all the subway tunnels taps, and which lets them through somehow into the tubes. Oh, it looks us a oh, it took us a long time to find all that out. At first, we thought we had to patrol the whole subway system of the city. We had guards even out under the river, and over in Brooklyn and Queens. We were even afraid they'd get into upper levels of the tunnels, perhaps into the very deserted streets of Manhattan. Perhaps into the very deserted streets of Manhattan during the pre-dawn hours. We'd had half the police department down here in those days. Even the mounted force. Yes, indeed. Though God knows what even a trained police horse will do if it came face to face with one of those things. But horses were faster than the handcars we used then, and could cover more territory. Oh, and I forgot to say thank you to all that stopped by, even if it was for a short while. Really appreciate it. We've been at this story for close to an hour. Hiccups happen, and, well, as I said earlier, it's a long, classic story. And I gotta hold this tablet while reading this. But as time went on, we got things pretty well localized. It's only in this one stretch of tunnel that the danger is, and only here in certain hours of the night. Don't ask me why they never come up in daylight, for it's always night down here, you know, hundreds of feet below the surface. Maybe it's the constant passage of the trains. They shuttle by at 2-minute intervals all day long. You know, and until the Broadway theaters close at night. Only for about 4 hours of the night if there's a lull when long miles of tunnel are lifeless and deserted and silent. When anything could come and go at all when anything could come and go at will in them and not be seen. Excuse me. And so it's only during this hours that we really worry, you see. It's only now that we're vigilant and ready. Although, of course, it's no longer warfare. You understand? We hunt them now. We hunt them now. They don't hunt us anymore. We run them down, howling with terror. Kill them or capture them as we will. Oh, yes, I say capture. A half dozen times we have a sort of mad Bronx Zoo of our own down here. Or perhaps it will be more accurate to say a living Madame Tussauds chamber of horrors. I have, I have cages in my laboratory, and there have been times when it seems judicious for influential people above ground to, well, to realize just how important is the work we're doing down here. So, when we have a really stubborn skeptic to our program, we take him in there, hand him a flashlight, and let him train it himself on what was present there in total darkness. And then we stand by to catch him as he fainted. Oh, a lot of city officials and politicians have been down here. Why not? They couldn't possibly speak of the experience afterwards. They'd just be locked up as lunatics if they did. And it made them much more liberal about funds. Our menagerie was a great success, only, only we just couldn't keep it going for a very long time. We get so we get so soul sick at the very proximity of the creature that we have to kill them finally. There was just no putting up with them for any length of time. Oh, it's not so much the appearance of the things, or even what they eat. We get an unlimited supply of that from the city morgue, and to anyone who's have spent half his life in dissecting rooms, as I have, it might be a lot worse. But there's a sort of cosmic horror that thinks a suit that, well, is quite beyond description. You just can't breathe the same air with them, live together in the same sane world. And in the end, we have to gun them and throw them back on the ground to their friends and neighbors who were, who were waiting for them, apparently. At least we've opened the shallow graves a few days later, and there be only a gnawed bone or two there. Oof. And then, of course, we kept them alive in order to study their habits. I filled 2 volumes with notes for my successors who'll carry on the fight when I'm gone. Oh, yes, old boy. They'll always have to be carry on, I fear. There's no possibility of ever really wiping them out, you know? All we can do is hold our own. The fight will go on so long as this particular tunnel is occupied. And can't you just see the city's fathers consenting to abandon $20 million worth of subway tunnels for nothing? I'm sorry, gentle. I'm sorry, gentlemen, but you see, the place is infected with God. What a laughingstock anyone will be. God, God, what a laughingstock anyone will be who even suggested that above ground. Why, even on our own furloughs. Why, even on our own furloughs. Why, even in our own furloughs, when we walk sunlit streets among our fellow men, with God's own blue sky above, and God's own clean air, uh, and God's own clear air about us, even we wonder Even we wonder whether all this foulness isn't just bad dream. Even we wonder whether all this foulness isn't just a bad dream. It's hard up there to realize what could go on down in the crepuscular. My goodness, old-fashioned English. This is old-fashioned English. It expands your vocabulary. Goodness gracious. Pero vos tienes que continuar con esta historia. La historia va a continuar porque vos la tienes que continuar para usted. It's hard up there to realize what could go on down in the crepuscular earth, the magno and eternal darkness far below. Below? The telephone was ringing. Somehow I didn't listen as he spoke briefly into it. Perhaps because I was listening to something else. To a faint crackling from the telephone was ringing. Somehow I didn't listen as he spoke briefly into it. Perhaps because I was listening to something else. To a faint crackling from the great black rock on the wall. Where one little light, no glowing worm this time, but only 1 minute spark, kept flicking oddly on and off, and on again. 79th Street, it marked, over and over. 79th Street, 70. My friend hung up the phone at length and stood up. Queer. No, said softly. No, queer, he said softly. Very queer indeed. First in months, and tonight now, while we're talking, it makes one wonder, about those supernatural telepathic powers that they're said to have. Something went past in the tunnel outside. Something that moved so fast that I could scarcely make it out. Just a little low platform on 4 wheels, with no visible engine to propel it. Yet it scud along with the speed of a racing car. Uniformed men rode the bucking thing, crouching with glinting objects in their hands. Riot car number 1, my Fred said grimly. Our own version of the squad automobiles above ground. Just one of the little electric hand cars used in the subway constructions, but souped up by our engineers until it'll do nearly 80 miles an hour. It could traverse the entire sector in less than 5 minutes, if it had to. But it doesn't, of course. Another one, also with machine gunners aboard, left 105th Street at the same time. They'll meet somewhere along the tunnel's length, with the disturbance in between. Let's listen to them. He crossed the room to the strange apparatus, threw switches and adjusted dials. There was a bearing and crackling from what looked like an old-fashioned radio amplifier that stood on one of the cabinets. Microphones every 100 feet along the tunnel. Microphones every 100 feet along the tunnel, said my friend. and other small fortunes to install, of course. But another great step forward in our efficiency. A man listens all night long at a switchboard. You'd be surprised to know what he hears sometimes. We have to change operators pretty often. Ah, there we are. Microphone number 290. Approximately 1,000 feet below one of the busiest corners. Even at this hour of the night. In all a great metropolis. In all a great metropolis. And listen. Hear that? That was a sound that brought me out of my chair. A strange high tittering, blasphemous, a strange high tittering, blasphemously, a strange high tittering, blasphemously off key that merged into a growl and moan. That merged into a growl and a moan. There we are, my friend grated. One of them, certainly. Perhaps more than one. Hear that scratching, the rustle of the gravel, all unsuspecting, of course, that they're broadcasting their presence, unaware that we modern human beings have got ourselves a few supernatural powers of our own nowadays, and unaware that, from both directions, death is sweeping down upon them on truckling wheels. But a little moment more, and ah, hear that shriek? The howling. That means they sat. That means they sat at one of the cars. They're fleeing madly along the tunnel now. The voices get fainter. And now, yes, now they do double back. The other car. They're trapped, caught between them. No time to dig. No time to dig. To burrow down into their saving Mother Earth like the vermin they are. No, no, you devils. We got you. Got you. Hear him yell. Hear him shrieking in agony. That's the lights, you know. Blazing searchlights trained on dark costume bodies. Burning, searing, withering them like actual blazing heat. And now, brrr, that's our machine guns going into actions. Silence gun, with maxims on them so that the echoes won't carry to upper levels and make men ask questions, but throwing slugs of lead for all that into cringing white bodies and flattened white skulls. Shriek! Shriek, you beasts from hell! Shriek, you monsters from the channel steps! Shriek on and see what good it does you. You're dead. 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 Well, you blasted fool. What are you staring at? To save my life, I couldn't have answered him. I couldn't look away from his blazing eyes. From his body crouched as he will spring at me. Oh, from his body, crouched as if he will spring at me across the room. From his teeth bare in a bestial snarl. For a long moment that tableau held. Then suddenly he dropped into a chair, flung his hands up over his face. I stood regarding him, my mind sickly ticking off details. God, why had I not seen them before? The lengthening of jaw, the flattening of forehead and cranium. No human head could be shaped like that. At last, he spoke. not looking up. I know, he says softly. I've felt the change coming on me for a long time now. It's coming over all of us, bit by bit. But on me the worst, for I've been here the longest. That's why I almost never go above ground anymore, even on leave. The lights are dim down here, but I wouldn't let even you see my face in sunlight. 25 years, you see. 25 long dragging years down here in hell itself. It was bound to leave a mark, of course. I was I was prepared for that. But oh great powers above, if I for one instant dreamed what it was to be. Worse. Oh, how much worse than any mark of the beast. And it's spiritual, you know, as well as physical. I get cravings sometimes down here in the lights. I get cravings sometimes down here in the night's loneliness. Thought and charnel desires that will blast your very souls if I were to whisper them to you. Oh, they'll get worse. I know. And worse until at last I run mad in the tunnel like that very poor devil I told you about. And my men shoot me down like a dog as they already have orders to do if, if. And yet, the thing interests me. I'll admit it. It interests me scientifically, even though it horrifies my very soul, even though it damns me forever, for it shows how they may have come about, must have come about. In fact, in the world's dim dawns, perhaps never quite human, of course, perhaps never near, perhaps never near Neanderthal, perhaps never nearer than dental, or even pale down, something even lower, closer linked to the primeval beasts. But that when driven on the ground into caves and then beneath them by man's coming, retrograded century by uncounted century down to the warm haunted darkness. Just as we poor devils are retrograding down here from the very contact with them, until alas, one of us will ever be able to again walk above in the blessed sunlight air among our fellow men. With a roar and a howl, the thing was upon us. Out of total darkness, instinctively, I drew back as the headlights passed. Every object in the little rooms rattled from the reverberation. Then the power car was then the power car was by. Then the power car was by. And there was only the clackety, and there was only the clackety, and there was only the clack, and there was only the clackety clack, clackety, clackety, clackety clack. There we go. Then the power car was by, and there was only the clackety clack, clackety clack of wheels and lighted windows flicking by like bits of film on a badly connection printer. Of wheels of wheels and lighted windows flicking by like bits of film on a badly connected projection machine. Oh, we're almost done with the story, folks. And as you can see, with mistakes and all, it's over an hour. Over an hour with mistakes and all. And the little one woke up, so I better finish this up. The 415 Express, he said heavily. From the Bronx, safe and sound. You'll notice its occupants all are suspecting of how they were safeguarded, of how they'll always be safeguarded. But at what cost? At what an awful cost. The 415 Express. That means it's dawn, you know. Hey, babe, go to sleep. It's late. The 415 Express. That means it's dawn, you know. In the city overhead, rays of the rising sun are gilding the white skyscrapers of Manhattan. Rays of the rising sun are gilding the white skyscrapers of Manhattan. A whole great city begins to wake to morning life. But there's no dawn for us down here, of course. There'll never be a dawn for poor lost souls down here in the eternal dark, far, far below. And that's today's story, Outlaw. And that's today's story, Outlaw. I hope that you enjoyed it and you can see the reason why my theory on day came to mind when I thought about day and this story far below. I love it. I love the twist. I love the plot twist on it. And like I mentioned prior and throughout the story, it's a classic and I don't want to change any of the wording on it, even if it is a struggle to do so. So those are the once again, those are the words of the author. I don't want to change them, and they are not my personal beliefs with saying certain words that some people might feel offended. Sucks if you're offended, but that's the story, and I don't want to change it. Well, hope that you like it. Leave a like and a comment, and like always, see you out the wasteland. And subscribe. Alright, folks. That was today's story. And I was able to luckily nip it in the bud before the little one woke up. No, close to when the little one woke up. Oh, excuse me. Close to when the little one woke up. Since he's still clinging to me like, yeah, time to go to sleep. I tell him time to go to sleep, and he's like, Daddy, Dad, Daddy. That's him right now. He's keeping quiet because he knows I'm live. But the rustle and the other noises that he will make will be quite a challenge if I'm narrating. That's why I try to do the whole narration when he's either passed out completely asleep or way, way early in the morning, like around 4, maybe 5 in the morning, which I'm tired as heck, but It needs to be done. Thank you very much to everybody that showed up. Appreciate you. Really means a lot. Really means a lot. Even if you leave a comment like, the One Piece is real, I'm gonna defeat you with Lim. Just you wait, bar. I already defeated you once. A victory is a victory. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter how I got it. Still a victory on my end. Well, y'all take care.